A coast of delicate colors looks out on the bluest of blue seas in a climate that's soft and sweet-scented. That's the impression Palermo gives as one arrives from the sea. A place where history, art and beauty help you to understand why this came to be known as the Conca d'Oro, the Golden Valley. The first settlement here was in the 8th century BC. According to history, the Phoenicians landed here because it looked so inviting. A wide bay facing a calm, translucent sea, land made fertile by an abundance of water and blessed with warm, sunny weather for most of the year. In time, the Greeks came, the Romans and the Arabs. Then later, the Normans, the Swedes, the Aragons, the Spanish and the French, right up to the time of Garibaldi and the united modern Italy of today. The heart of Palermo is Piazza Villena, where the two main streets meet, Via Maqueda and Corso Vittorio Emanuele. The square is commonly known as I Quattro Canti, or the Four Angles, because of the four corners in which splendid examples of Baroque decoration can be seen. Fountains with statues that symbolize the four seasons, the Spanish kings, and the four saints of Palermo, Cristina, Oliva, Agata, and Nympha. Behind the Piazza dei Quattro Canti lies the most beautiful square in the city, Piazza Pretoria, which takes its name from the ancient palazzo that dominates it, the Palazzo Pretoria, today the city's town hall or comune. It dates from 1463 and was built to house the parliament of the city, the Senate. Jewel of the piazza is the marvelous fountain which adorns it, a sumptuously rich work of art with dozens of statues representing pagan gods, mythological and allegorical figures. Not far from the piazza, we come across two of the great arches that give access to the city center, the Porta Nuova, built at the end of the 16th century, inspired by late Renaissance architecture, and the magnificent Porta Felice, also constructed in the 16th century and rich in decorative detail of the highest architectural and artistic value. The monument which represents the city best is the exquisite cathedral, erected in 1185 by the Archbishop of English origin, Gualtiero o Famiglio, on the ancient site of a Roman basilica, which had been turned into a mosque by the Muslims. Finished over the centuries, the basilica has witnessed all the great events of the city's history and reflects the changing architectural styles over time, which together lend the building an extraordinarily cohesive beauty. The interior is reached through a great door with 3 arches, surmounted by a niche in which there is a mosaic of the Virgin Mary, a small jewel of the Aragonese Gothic style. The interior is imposing and rich in works of art, starting with magnificent frescoes on the choir ceiling in the neoclassical style. The throne of Ruggiero II is simple and regal. He was the son of Ruggiero I, who banished the Arabs from the city. The cathedral also contains some opulent tombs of great Norman kings. Ruggiero II's tomb is surmounted by an elaborate baldacchino decorated with mosaics and is supported by marble lions. The tomb of Costanza d'Altavilla, wife of Enrico IV, is made of solid porphyro and also boasts a splendid baldacchino. The tomb of the great emperor Federico II, one of the leading figures of the 12th century, believed to have been originally sculpted for Emperor Ruggiero in the cathedral at Cefalù, was transferred here in 1213. Of the period of Arab domination, from 831 to 1072, unfortunately little remains. However, the successive cultures have left us a great deal, starting with the Normans. After they beat the Arabs, Ruggiero I wanted to erect his throne in the same building from which they had ruled. The ancient Palazzo degli Emiri, Palace of the Emirs, thus became the Palace of the Normans, destined soon to become the center of European art and culture of the 13th century. The Palazzo, which today houses the Sicilian Regional Parliament, presents an imposing facade and is made up of sections from various epochs. Inside it, the rooms are filled with splendid works of art. A huge staircase leads to the courtyard of the Viceroy Makeda, built in 1600 in a classical style of great elegance. To one side of the portico, there are 5 large mosaic panels created in 1700 under Ferdinand de Bourbon that illustrate the story of Anselm, David's rebellious son. Various towers complete the architecture of the palazzo. This is the Torre dei Venti, Tower of the Winds, ancient chapel of Jerusalem, whose ceiling, which was demolished at the beginning of the 18th century, is covered in fake mosaics. Particularly spectacular is the aptly named Yellow Room, or Sala Gialla, its ceiling covered in fine frescoes. Torre Pisana, or Pisan Tower, 15 meters high, contains a great hall with a cross-vaulted ceiling where the king could hold audiences. The great Sala dei Vicerei, the Viceroy's Hall, is so called because of the large portraits of the Viceroy hanging on its walls. But the most famous and luxurious place of all is the magnificent Palatine Chapel, one of the city's greatest glories. It was built at the beginning of the 12th century, immediately after the coronation of Ruggiero, soon becoming the center of palace life. The splendors of the chapel include the wonderful mosaics that adorn the walls and the roof of the apse and the dome. These are extraordinary works of art executed by Byzantine masters in the 11th century, representing stories from the Old Testament of Saints Peter and Paul, the Nativity, the entrance into Jerusalem, and many other holy scenes. An incomparable treasure, perfectly preserved, whose visual function constitutes an important message that is not merely religious but historical and political as well. Dominating the chapel is the overpowering presence of Christ Pantocrator, Lord of Creation, according to Byzantine custom, who gives the blessing in the Greek manner. We end our visit to the Palazzo dei Normanni in the Hall of Ruggiero, splendidly decorated on walls and ceiling, one of the numerous illustrations of the importance of ancient Arab art. Many of the greatest works of art in Sicily can be traced back to the work of Arab artists, which only goes to show that the Norman and Swedish conquerors, though regarding them as their enemies, respected and absorbed the influence of their culture. And it is in these sumptuous yet subtle places that the most important European culture was to between 1200 and 1300. Here the emperors gathered together the best scientists and poets, musicians and painters of the time. It was in the era of Federico II that Sicilian poetry flowered, becoming a cornerstone of future Italian literature. Continuing our visit to the most important monuments of the Norman period, we come to the church of San Giovanni degli Eremiti, St. John of the Hermits. Built halfway through the 12th century, the church is characterized by the typical red arabesque dome. It represents an ingenious adaptation to Christian functions of the preceding Arab construction, the kubba, that dates back to the 6th century AD. This building, like so many here, owes a great debt to the highly developed techniques of Muslim architecture and design. Similar in layout to San Giovanni degli Eremiti is the church of San Cathaldo, not far from Piazza Pretoria and the Quattro Canti. The church was built soon after 1150 in the time of Guglielmo I and donated by his successor, Guglielmo II, to the Benedictines. In this case, too, the structure is typically arabesque and is an example of the perfection of the craftsmanship of the Arab builders which served the Christian king. Beside San Cathaldo, we find another important artistic landmark of the city, Santa Maria dell'Ammiraglio, better known as the Martorana. Completed in 1143, the church has undergone many alterations over the centuries. Of the original structure, only the elegant campanile remains, while the present facade, typically Baroque, contrasts strikingly with the rest of the building. Splendid inside, it is covered in wonderful mosaics in a pure Byzantine style, which are some of the oldest in Sicily. From high up in the cupola, the solemn figure of Jesus Christ dominates everything else, surrounded by 4 angels, while the figures of the apostles, the 4 evangelists, and the prophets cover the walls of the drum and vault above the altar. Other sacred scenes cover the arcades, completing an artistic picture of extraordinary solemnity and visual spectacle. The same person commissioned the Martorana, Giorgio d'Antiochia, King Ruggiero's great admiral, who had it built in 1113. In 1860, the bridge, called the Admiral's Bridge for obvious reasons, witnessed the victory of the Garibaldini over the Bourbons. There are numerous other examples of Norman art to be found. The oldest church, that of San Giovanni dei Lebbrosi, St. John of the Lepers, according to many historians, was begun by King Ruggiero as far back as 1071, a full year before the Normans actually managed to enter Palermo. The church owes its name to a leprosy hospital, set up there in 1150 and restored in the first half of the 18th century to eliminate a thick layer of plaster and other superficial structures that had modified its original aspect. This restoration did not, however, impede the arbitrary construction of the present campanile. Just as old is the Church of the Magione, founded around 1191 by Matteo d'Aiello, Chancellor of the Norman kings, and donated by him to the Cisterciensis monks. The name of the church refers to the ancient Teutonic order, to which it was given in 1197. They had the job of helping the minority German group living in Sicily at the time, of which this became their mansion, the headquarters of the Preceptor General of their order. On Easter Monday, 1283, while celebrating Vespers, some French soldiers offended the Sicilian women present at the service in the church of Santo Spirito, causing a violent reaction on the part of all Sicilians, who rose up in revolt all over the island. The incident, remembered as the Sicilian Vespers, led to the final overthrow of all the French in Sicily. From that moment on, the church itself came to be known as Il Vespro. The interior of the building, which today has no facade, has a Latin plan with 3 naves divided by tall columns and is of an extreme solemnity. We end our visit to the principal Norman monuments of Palermo with Palazzo De La Ziza, a building that was begun by Guglielmo I halfway through the 12th century on the foundations of an earlier palace in the middle of a large park enriched with numerous Arabic monuments. The palazzo owes its name to the Arab term aziz, meaning splendid, and has a profoundly Middle Eastern atmosphere with the Oriental influence plainly visible, which, as we have already seen, colored much of the Norman architectural style. Obvious examples are the fountain and mosaic adorning the front, which remind us of luxuriant Oriental gardens. Serious and serene inside, it is ventilated by an ingenious air conditioning system which enabled the Norman sovereigns to relax in cool comfort during the heat of summer. Now it is often used as a suitable venue for important exhibitions. Jumping a few centuries, we find ourselves in another great epoch of the city, the Baroque period. One of the most sumptuous monuments of this era is the Church of San Domenico, built on the ruins of 2 other Dominican churches, one from 1200, the other from 1400. The present church dates from the mid-17th century and is an extraordinary example of the evolution of Baroque architecture, which from its severe Roman origins literally exploded into airy panoramas and scenic splendors. The Khalsa quarter of the city is down by the port and was a citadel where the ruling Arabs had established their headquarters. The Church of Santa Teresa, right in Piazza Khalsa, is surely one of the best examples of Grand Baroque, with its typically ornate facade perfectly preserved despite its age. Less fortunate is this church in the same quarter, the Khalsa. This is the church of Spasimo, whose ruins reveal vestiges of its complicated history and the complexity of its ancient structure. Raphael painted a picture especially for this church, the Madonna dello Spasimo, which in 1661 was sold to King Philip IV of Spain by a prelate in need of money. Today it resides in the Prado Museum in Madrid. The last visit we shall make to Palermitano Baroque is to the Church of Teatini beside the central Piazza Villena and the seat of the university. The church was erected on the ruins of another on the orders of the Teatini, who had won a struggle in the 17th century with the Jesuits, who laid claim to the location. It took almost 40 years to complete, but the results were spectacular. The interior is entirely lined with precious marble, enriched by immense columns and decorated with wonderful frescoes. making it a truly important national monument. But another temple was destined to create a stir in the city that has never ceased. We move now to the outskirts of Palermo, on a gentle hill from which the city seems hazy and distant. Here in 1174, King Guglielmo II laid the cornerstone for a cathedral which was to become one of the most splendid temples of all Christendom, that of Monreale. The exterior of the Duomo is massive and uniform. The facade is simple and lacks any distinctive decorative elements. It seems to be hiding what lies within. Yet beneath the arches of the central apse we find the first of its marvels, a stupendous bronze door, the Porta Regum. It was built in 1186 by Bonanno Pisano, the architect who, 12 years earlier, had built the Tower of Pisa. But the interior of the cathedral is spectacularly beautiful, decorated with the most complete cycle of Byzantine mosaics to come down to us. They cover every corner of the walls, extending over an area of almost 6,500 square meters, even greater than that covered in St. Mark's in Venice, illustrating scenes from the Old and New Testaments in a blaze of refined beauty, impressively inlaid with large sections of pure gold, forming a background to most of the figures represented. The whole is dominated by an incredible depiction of Christ Pantocrator giving the blessing. art of the Duomo is not limited to the interior of the basilica. Next to it is a wonderful cloister that we can visit, belonging to the Benedictine monastery, which of its kind has few rivals in all the world. Perfectly square, each side measures 47 meters, and it represents an excellent example of Sicilian Romanesque architecture. The cloisters contain 228 curled columns, each different from the others, encrusted with gold and decorated with mosaics and precious stones, worked in delicate bas reliefs. A gorgeous fountain stands in a corner, carved in the form of a palm tree, giving a wonderful impression of an oriental garden. Equally extraordinary are the capitals, a marvelous sculptural anthology in which the religious figures blend perfectly with secular ones. They include biblical scenes, birds, animal fights, and numerous subjects of a wide creative imagination. We leave Monreale and fly once more over Palermo. We're over the largest park of the city, the Favorita in the center, which is noticeable for a most unusual building, the Chinese Palace, which dates from the 18th century. There are two major temples of music in Palermo, two theaters of great historical importance, recently returned to their former magnificence with a rigorous program of restoration, the Teatro Massimo and the Politeama. This last is still today a symbol of the city's great musical past. It's a sumptuous yet sober example of neoclassical architecture and presents an academic interpretation of the polychrome decorations of Pompeii. The Teatro Massimo, the most important theatre in the city, stands in Piazza Verdi and was built at the end of the 19th century. It's severe and austere, an obvious symbol of the will to keep it balanced and moderate, its architecture an expression of the bourgeois values of the time, which disapproved of all things extreme and espoused a rejection of the intemperate exaggeration of Baroque, which preceded it. Another sumptuous edifice. This is Villa Igea, a mythical place for the people of Palermo, which reminds them proudly and with perhaps a touch of nostalgia of the great days depicted in Lampedusa's novel The Leopard. This elegant construction, dating from the end of the 19th century, is now one of the most luxurious hotels in Sicily, reflecting the taste for art and beauty that guided those who governed the city. Now to a different sort of place. Founded in 1785 by the Viceroy Caracciolo, the Botanical Gardens of Palermo represent a precious occasion to sample the genuine pleasures of nature. It covers an area of 10 hectares, and thanks to the extraordinary climate that the city is blessed with year-round, rare and exotic plants are able to flourish here in abundance. The city of today, pulsating with life despite the problems and contradictions that beset it, possesses a spirit and vitality that is irrepressible. We cannot avoid a visit to the Vucceria, the most famous open market in Palermo. It's become fashionable to visit this noisy and colorful place, where a cross-section of society mingles happily in the sunshine. Walking in the midst of it all, surrounded by the distinctive colors, sounds, and smells of the place, gives the visitor an idea of the character of the people, who can be simple and generous, as well as sanguine and passionate. Taking to the air once more, we fly over Monte Pellegrino. From the summit, there's an unforgettable view of the Conca d'Oro. The occasion gives us the chance to visit a place that is sacred to the Palermitani. the sanctuary of Santa Rosalia, patron saint of the city. The sanctuary is built in the Baroque form, erected near the grotto where the saint prayed, miraculously saving the city from a terrible epidemic. A statue of the saint covered in a golden cloak is still venerated today, and the water that pours from the rock is collected and regarded as holy. Particularly spectacular is the annual festival dedicated to the saint, which demonstrates all the imagination and enthusiasm of the Sicilian people. To all Sicilians, the customs and traditions that recall their history are of great importance. The painted carretti or carts carry the descendants of the ancient bards, who have transformed the history of Sicily into a living, breathing song, so clear and loud that it transcends borders and can be appreciated and understood by people of other lands. The puppet theatre, apparently so simple and naive, is really a manifestation of the national psyche and very much a part of Sicilian culture.
Lo sapete? Non è giusto che siete cuciti. Questo è anche vero. E dunque, vi battete per amore e non per la difesa della santa fede. Cosa dici mai, cugino? Io voglio Angelica a tutti i costi, anch'io. Angelica è mia. No, è mia. Angelica è mia.
We cannot leave Palermo without a quick look at what lies around it, the setting of this priceless jewel. First of all, there's the glorious sea. The most famous beach resort is Mondello, near the edge of the city, filled with splendid hotels which offer the tourist the most comfortable accommodation to be found anywhere, where they can escape the city chaos and relax. There are many other interesting local spots, each with its own special story, like the Isle of Femmine, whose name conjures up an ancient prison for women, which was situated here. And this is Ferracavallo, a delightful seaside spot famous for its gastronomic pleasures, which are extraordinarily varied and delicious. a small town very close to Palermo, where the nobility of Sicily chose to build their summer villas in the 17th century, making it the smart resort of the rich. The most celebrated of these historical holiday homes is the Villa Pelagonia, built at the start of the 18th century by Prince Ferdinando Francesco Gravina of Pelagonia, who had it adorned with dozens of statues of a grotesque nature. Monsters, dwarfs, satyrs, all kinds of weird creatures in human form. It's become an unusual museum, a collection of the fantastic, giving the place a magic atmosphere. Night falls once more over the city. The chaotic traffic, the noise of the bustling streets and squares, fades as the monuments, churches and palaces become serene once more, slipping back into earlier eras, when this was a calmer place and time stands still. Back it goes into its sometimes turbulent past, showing signs of change, but retaining its soul and its character. A character forged by being an integral part of the ancient civilizations that make the world what it is today.